Good willkommen in einem and in a Fragens video. Welcome to another exciting video, in this case part 25 of my Star Trek TOS Timeline series of videos. In this video, I'll be generally covering Kirk's 5-year mission, specifically trying to arrive at the exact dates or years of that 5-year mission. As with my other videos, it's important to determine the year Kirk's mission begins and what periods are covered in the 3 seasons with any degree of accuracy. But there are a couple of clues which can assist me in determining when Kirk's 5-year mission occurred, and 2 methods of identifying the current date of the seasons. The first source we have is a quote from the episode Miri, coupled with an assumption by Okuda, which may be the father of all Star Trek timelines, and which I greatly respect. According to the Okuda Time-Line, Kirk's 5-year mission lasts from 2264 to 2269, based on the assumption that the original series is set exactly 300 years after its original broadcast. The aired live-action Star Trek episode was dated 2266 to 2269 as a result. I'm uncertain where the 300 years comes from, but it's likely from the Miri episode. This means the first episode of Season 1 must represent the 3rd year of the mission, which is 2266, according to this theory anyway. In the episode Miri, which is episode 8 of Season 1, Spock indicates all adults died on this planet, which I'll call Earth 2, 300 years ago. Spock indicates the planet is the same as our Earth was approximately in 1960. The disease which kills the adults acted very quickly, well within a year. The assumption is the disease occurred in the same year as Season 1 of Star Trek was first aired. The episode was aired in November 1966, which makes it 2266, November to be exact. In an interview in the book The Making of Star Trek by Stephen Whitfield in 1999, Roddenberry states the Star Trek first season takes place after the mission had been underway for some time. It must be pointed out this was 24 years after the first episode was aired. If nothing in the original series of Star Trek conflicts with this statement, we would almost certainly take it as part of canon. However, there is at least one piece of information in Season 1 which makes this highly unlikely. While the start year of the mission in 2264, as stated by Okuda, is reasonable and causes no issue with any other events in the scripts, there are issues with Season 1 starting in the 3rd year of Kirk's 5-year mission. One problem is that it causes too many issues with other dates in the episode, such as Spock's relationships with Leila. I have assumed the Okuda dates are correct, which means the mission now starts 298 years after the broadcast date in 2264. This allows us to assume the animated series covers the last 2 years of the mission. But this is not the reason why I have selected a 298 year after the broadcast. It's just a useful side effect. I must note, it's possible Gene wanted Season 1 to start in the 3rd year to ensure the animated series would not be considered as the remaining 2 years and as such part of canon. Gene did not want the animated series to be considered as canon. At least he did not wish this to be the case in 1991. I'm uncertain what his thoughts were on the matter were prior to this date, and especially during the period that the animated series was actually being filmed. In the episode This Side of Paradise, Spock is spending time with Leila 6 years prior to the 1st year of the Kirk mission, which implies he went on a 5-year mission with Pike before he joined Kirk, and is on the 1st year of a 5-year mission with Kirk. If this was the 3rd year of Kirk's mission, this could not occur. So the 3rd year theory cannot be correct, unless we assume Pike's mission was only 3 years in length, rather than a 5-year length period. There is no evidence in the TOS script to support the episode starts in the 3rd year of the mission, and there is evidence it did start in the 1st year. Not solid evidence, but certainly reasonable evidence. I'll assume the 3 seasons represent the first 3 years and the animated series the last 2. It may not be correct, but for our purposes it's the simplest guess, and I will always go for the simplest guess which meets or which aligns with all the evidence I have. The statement made in 1999 by Gene was many years after the original series was shown, and Gene was beginning to want to change his vision at that point, so this may be a revision of his original thoughts. In the episode This Side of Paradise, we know Spock met Leila on Earth 6 years ago. This would not be during his 5-year mission with Kirk, but was probably a gap between the two 5-year missions, or between the 5-year mission with Pike and then the later 5-year mission with Kirk. Spock served for 11 years and 4 months with Pike, which was probably a 5-year mission, a 1-year, 4-month refit at Earth, and then another 5-year mission with Pike. He would have met, that is, Spock would have met Leila during the 1-year, several months, 4-month period he spent on Earth. Even if the Enterprise returned to Earth during a 5-year mission, it would not stay long enough for Spock to have developed any kind of relationship or got to know Leila in any way, shape or form, and especially for Leila to fall in love with Spock. Although once again in the hypersex world of Star Trek, people seem to fall in love in about 10 nanoseconds, so I'm not sure how valid that last statement is, but nonetheless that's what I'm going for. I must admit, it's possible the Enterprise may have returned to Earth in between the two 5-year missions, but once again it's unlikely the Enterprise would have stayed for long enough at Earth, and that would mean Kirk's 5-year mission needs to be its last year, which is not really possible. Spock had feelings for Leila. This would have taken some time to develop, even in the hyper-sex world of Star Trek. It's not impossible the Enterprise experienced a major refit and did stay for a long time, but it's very unlikely and would represent a big gap in Kirk's 5-year mission. The starbases would have been able to do all the maintenance and repairs normally required, while allowing the Enterprise to remain on station at the borders of the Federation territory, which is where it needed to be in this 5-year mission. Thus, this must have been before he was appointed, that is, the relationship must have developed before he was appointed to the Enterprise under Kirk, or actually before Kirk was appointed to the Enterprise, and before Spock were reported to Kirk. Leila spent 1 year travelling to the colony and 3 years on the colony, so he must have spent 2 years on Earth after meeting Spock. The most likely scenario was Spock was with Pike for a 5-year mission, returned to Earth for a refit, met Leila on Earth, then had another 5-year mission with Pike, then returned to Earth, where Kirk took command, and this was the first year of the 5-year mission with Kirk. I suspect between Pike and Kirk there was another refit which took a while. We do have a 4-month period to play with, during which Spock was not under the command of Pike or Kirk. This is not conclusive, but if it was the 3rd year of the mission, then Pike's mission would have needed to be 3 years in length. There's no reason why this mission would be so short, while Kirk's would be longer. And it also doesn't align with the total length of time Spock served under Pike. This chart shows both scenarios. Now, both scenarios could be valid if Pike's last mission was 3 years in length. This is pretty important. Some reason needs to be given to explain why the Pike mission was shorter. Because no reason is provided, it's much less likely. The other problem is that Spock served under Pike for 11 years and 4 months. So what was he doing? Was the first Pike mission longer? Let's say 8 years instead of 5? We're stretching reality here. We're stretching what minimal information we have here in order to ram this theory into our timeline. Kirk obviously has some familiarity in Spock where no man has gone before, which could indicate that it was not the first year, but this could have been gained as the Enterprise travelled out to its station. It had to travel probably 400 light years to the edge of the galactic barrier. There would have been some time for the two to get to know each other. My most likely conclusion is the 5-year mission began in 2264, ended in 2269, and Season 1 corresponds with the first year. Each year would span 2 Earth calendar years, so the first year of the mission would have spanned 2264 and 2265, but it would have begun in 2264 if we use the episodes as our guide in November 2264. In the episode The Squire of Gothos, there is evidence the actual year is 2805, which does not match anything we've been using. Mind you, this date may actually be correct, and it's possible all our earlier estimates are totally wrong. That is, everyone on the internet, including myself. Even if it was true, it's best not thinking about this. In the episode Squire of Gothos, Trelane views Earth from 900 light years away. thus sees Earth 900 years ago. There is a bust of Napoleon shown, who was at his peak in 1805, which means it's most likely 2805. If this is 2264, then Trelane is viewing Earth during the year 1364, which is the Middle Ages. There is nothing about this episode which implies that Trelane is surrounded himself with 14th century paraphernalia, so this cannot be correct. I have to assume, or I suspect an error has been made, and the distance is actually 460 light years away, which would allow Napoleon to be in Trelane's environment, as mentioned. If this is correct, the size of the Federation is about the size that I originally estimated in my earlier video episodes, which is 300 to 400 light year radius with Earth at its centre. If the 900 light year value is correct, the Federation is a lot larger than we may have thought. The densities of stars are much less, warp speed must be much greater, and then we have the problem with the Voyager being able to return to Earth too quickly. While there are many benefits in assuming the current year is 2805, we have more time for the Federation to expand, and we could match up the timelines with our real timelines, but such a 440-year change would require so many changes to be made to the timeline canon. I have no interest in doing that and just want to stay away. I'll adopt the theory that it's an error and the distance is actually 460 light years, thus making it an incredibly weak reference to indicate the current year is 2264. If it's the first year of Kirk's 5-year mission, then it aligns with Okuda. However, this is very weak evidence, and I'm only using it to confirm another stronger piece of evidence. As it allies with my speeds of warp and distances in the Federation, it can even act as a weak data point to confirm those theories. A win-win situation, a rather weak win-win situation, but one nonetheless. Now let's look at James R. or James T. Kirk's history, or everything we happen to know about it. We are supposedly able to see the birth date of James R. Kirk, which in this episode, where no man has gone before, is 012771. The current star date is 1313.7, which may be wrong, as the episode starts at star date 1312.4. Very confusing all around. Later, James' middle name changes to T. I should note in the original series, the date does look like 1818.7 if you go back to the original actual film rather than 1313.7, as has been stated on the internet. An enhanced and tampered version is shown on the bottom left, showing this 1313.7, which may or may not be correct. The estimate is James T. Kirk is born in 2228. I have no idea if this is correct or not, but let's run with that date to see if it aligns with other script facts. In the episode Conscious of the King, the famine on Tarsus V occurred most likely in 2240. Kirk was on the planet and must have been 12 years old when this occurred. This is surprisingly credible if we assume my formula of colony population growth is correct. I'm assuming that at this particular point in time, based on its population, this colony is a particular size. Let's look at this in a little bit more detail. The episode The Conscious of the King mentions there are 8,000 colonists on the planet. Based on my colony growth formula, this could mean that it's 13 years old. It's likely Kirk was 12 at the time, which means he could have been born on Tarsus IV and his parents were early colonists. This kind of confirms Kirk's birth date, indirectly and possibly with an error factor, but it does not start a line of inquiry which could indicate that it's wrong. This is, I have to admit, weak. It's a weak confirmation of birth date, which was 2228, with the famine occurring in 2240, but there's nothing here which conflicts that would make me think there's a problem. In the episode Who Cods Destroy, the Battle of Axanar was required. We learned that the Battle of Axanar was required reading at the Academy when Kirk was attending. We know the battle probably occurred in 2245, which is well before Kirk attended the Academy. So, the book can be written for Kirk to read. No issue here. My guess is Kirk entered the Academy when he was 21 in 2251, graduated in 3 years, and served on the Farragut under Gavrić as a lieutenant, until the captain was killed in the same year, 2254. This is pure guesswork and is based on Kirk graduating in 3 years. In the episode Court Martial, we learned Kirk served on the United Starship Republic, number 1372, with Commander Finney. I suspect this was a training mission, as Commander Finney was an instructor at the Academy. Unfortunately, I have no idea of the dates. In the episode of Private Little War, we discover Kirk visited a planet, a Garden of Eden, or what I call Apella, 13 years ago in 2252. This was the year after Spock started reporting to Pike, and several years after the Vulcanian expedition in 2247. In the episode Whom God Destroys, Kirk mentions he visited Axanar on a peace mission when he was a cadet, probably sometime between 2251 and 2254. No problems here. As a result, my guess that Kirk entered the Academy when he was 21 in 2251, graduated in 3 years and served on the Farragut under Garrovick as an ensign until that captain was killed in the same year, 2254, is probably correct. Kirk served on the USS Farragut under Captain Garrovick. At that time, he was almost certainly 24 years old. Kirk was 34 when he became captain, possibly in 2264, or probably even earlier. This means in 2254 he must have been 24 years old. Okay, this aligns. It seems Kirk graduated in 3 years, so if this incident occurred in the first year he entered the Academy when he was 21, I suspect he was younger, but let's say 21. This timeline's a little bit compressed. It's possible, but graduating, serving on the Farragut, immediately getting into this big fracas, etc., with the gas monster, a lot occurs. In Obsession, it's stated Kirk is a young officer. He joined the Farragut as a lieutenant, which is the reference. In the episode Where No Man Has Gone Before, Michael mentions Kirk was a bookworm. However, this may have been a later date, as he was a Lieutenant Kirk teaching at the Academy at this time. Perhaps this occurred for a short time after Kirk graduated and before he joined the USS Farragut, even compressing his timeline a little bit more. Again, it's possible, but it's, getting a little bit tight. Kirk served on the USS Farragut under Captain Garrovick. While on the ship, Kirk encountered the gas creature in 2254 when he was 24 years old. Nearly half the crew and captain were killed. Kirk was one of the survivors. Kirk served under Captain Garrovick. He was also Kirk's commanding officer from the day he left the Academy. In Obsession, Kirk is a lieutenant. Perhaps when he left, he reported to Garrovick, but went on leave for a short while to teach at the Academy before the Farragut was ready to leave. In the episode What a Little Girl's Made Of, Kirk mentions a translation of medical records from the Orion runes, which was required reading at the Academy. We know Kirk must have read this material, written by Corby. Corby was missing for 5 years, if not more, possibly went missing in 2259. In the episode Pattern of Force, we learn Kirk studied history written by John Gill, who went missing in 2263. This easily allows him to write the books Kirk read when Kirk was in the Academy between 2251 and 2254. So far, nothing is causing me problems. It's true I may have missed some data or facts in the TOS script relating to Kirk's life in my current analysis, but as it does not impact general history, it's a low priority for myself. But I do find interesting relationships which give me clues of Kirk's life, and I may come back to add them in a version 2 of this video. But so far, none of the facts seem to conflict with the estimated birth of Kirk. I was going over Kirk's journey in this video, but I'll create a separate video for this to give you a view of what happens to Kirk after he becomes commander of the Enterprise. You can find my early attempts at this in my Season 1 and Season 2 conclusion videos, but as these are reasonably old, I expect my next attempt will be much more detailed, and I'll probably remove those conclusion videos for that reason. And so we come to an end of my part 25 of my Star Trek TOS timeline, in this case covering Kirk's 5-year mission, specifically the dates of the mission and also Kirk's life. The episode script can be found using the URL shown. Alle guten Ding kommen zu einem Ende.